The overhead panels in the lecture hall flickered twice before settling into their usual dim glow. Owen Hayes shifted in his seat, trying to find a position that didn't make his back ache. 3 months at the Galactic Institute of Advanced Studies, and he still wasn't used to the furniture designed for species with completely different body structures. Around him, the other students were settling in for what the schedule called Xenobiology Practical Session. Owen had signed up thinking it would be like the wildlife observation courses back on Earth. Safe distance, lots of note-taking, maybe some video footage of creatures in their natural habitats, the kind of thing that would look good on his anthropology research portfolio. He was starting to think he'd made a mistake. Professor Drath stood at the front of the room, all 7 feet of crystalline structure catching the light in strange ways. The Morvian species didn't have faces the way humans understood them, but Owen had learned to read the subtle color shifts in Drath's surface. Right now, those colors were cycling through what Owen's handbook called anticipatory satisfaction. That couldn't be good. Students, Drath's voice resonated through the translation device embedded in the ceiling. Today we begin the portion of this course that separates the serious xenobiologists from those who merely wish to observe pretty creatures from behind barriers. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Owen noticed that 2 of the Pillock students with their colorful feather crests were already edging toward the exits. Their species came from a world where the most dangerous predator was about the size of a house cat. He'd learned that in his first week, when they'd all shared stories about their home planets during orientation. You have all read about deathworlds in your preparatory materials, Drath continued. Planets where the evolutionary pressure created apex predators of unusual lethality. Today you will meet a resident of one such world. Owen's stomach did an uncomfortable flip. He pulled out his data pad and quickly scrolled through the course materials. Deathworld. The classification went up to level 9, with Earth sitting comfortably at level 4. Dangerous enough to produce humans who could handle themselves, but nothing compared to the real nightmare planets. Sir, a voice called out. It was Pyrrha, the teaching assistant, her feathers ruffling in what Owen had learned meant anxiety. Are you certain this is advisable? We have several students from low-risk worlds in this class, which is precisely why this lesson is necessary, Drath replied. His surface colors shifted to something that might have been determination. Fear is an excellent teacher, Pyrrha. It teaches respect. It teaches caution. And it teaches students whether they have the temperament for field work. Owen watched as 3 more students quietly gathered their belongings and left through the side door. Nobody stopped them. Apparently, leaving before a dangerous demonstration wasn't considered cowardly here. Just sensible. He thought about leaving too. But something kept him in his seat. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fact that he'd grown up near the Cascade Mountains, where hiking meant understanding that you shared the forest with bears and mountain lions. His grandfather had taught him that fear was fine, but panic would get you killed. The creature you are about to meet, Drath said, moving toward a large reinforced container at the back of the teaching platform, comes from Krinath 7, a death world rated at level 8. It is an apex predator, never successfully domesticated by its native species. The Krinathi people treat these beings with reverence and terror in equal measure. Owen could hear his own heartbeat now. Level 8. That was double Earth's rating. I have kept this particular specimen for 5 years. His name is Shrike, and he is my companion, my research subject, and a constant reminder of the power and beauty of evolutionary perfection. Drath's colors swirled into something almost affectionate. He is also extremely dangerous. The remaining students, maybe 15 of the original 30, pressed closer together. Owen noticed he was in the 3rd row, closer to the front than most. An insectoid Chittick student in front of him was making a high-pitched whine that the translator couldn't interpret, but the meaning was clear enough. Shrike has claws that can tear through ship hulls, Drath continued, his appendage resting on the container's locking mechanism. His bite force exceeds that of most industrial presses. He can track prey across 3 continents using senses your species don't even possess. And he has never, in the 5 years I have kept him, shown aggression toward me. That's supposed to be reassuring? Someone muttered behind Owen. The key to understanding predators, Drath said, is understanding that they are not mindless killers. They are thinking beings with complex behavioral patterns. Shrike and I have an understanding. We respect each other's space and capabilities. You will now learn to do the same. Owen gripped the edge of his desk. Every instinct from his anthropology training was firing at once. Observe, stay calm, watch for behavioral cues. Don't make assumptions based on human experience. There are protocols, Pyrrha announced, her voice shaking slightly as she pulled up a holographic display. No sudden movements. No direct eye contact for longer than 2 seconds. Maintain a distance of at least 3 meters. If Shrike approaches you, remain absolutely still. What if he attacks? A Hydrian student asked from inside their water-filled mobility suit. He won't, Drath said with complete confidence, unless you give him reason to. Remember, you are in a room with an apex predator. Act accordingly. The professor's appendage touched the locking mechanism. Owen heard the magnetic seals disengage with a deep thunk that he felt in his chest. The container's door began to slide open, and then Owen saw it. 8 legs, each one thick as a tree trunk, moved out of the container first. They were covered in dark armored plating that looked like it could stop bullets. Maybe it could. The legs ended in what Owen could only describe as blade claws, each one curved and gleaming. Then came the body. Massive, easily the size of a small car. The torso was barrel-shaped, covered in the same armor plating with patterns that seemed to shift in the light. 6 eyes, arranged in 2 rows of 3, gleamed with an intelligence that made Owen's breath catch. The head was wedge-shaped, powerful, with a mouth full of crystalline teeth that refracted the room's light into rainbow patterns. Beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Shrike stepped fully into the lecture hall, and Owen understood why this was called a practical lesson. All the videos and descriptions in the world couldn't prepare you for being in the same room as something like this. The creature's 6 eyes swept across the students, several backed against the walls. Owen heard footsteps behind him as more students fled, but Owen stayed in his seat, watching. Not frozen in fear, just watching, and Shrike's eyes found him. Shrike moved like water despite his enormous size. Each of his 8 legs found purchase on the lecture hall floor without making a sound. Owen found that more disturbing than if the creature had stomped around. Something that big shouldn't be able to move silently. The creature's 6 eyes continued scanning the room, pausing on each remaining student for a moment before moving on. Owen could see the intelligence behind those eyes. This wasn't some mindless beast. Shrike was thinking, evaluating, making decisions. Professor Drath stood beside his companion with obvious pride in his posture. His crystalline surface reflecting colors that Owen had learned meant satisfaction. Notice how he assesses each of you. Shrike is determining threat levels, measuring your responses, calculating whether you pose any danger to him or to me. One of the Pillock students made a small sound of distress. Shrike's head swiveled toward her immediately, eyes focusing with predatory precision. The student froze, her feather crest flattening against her skull in pure terror. Excellent example, Drath said, his voice calm, despite the tension crackling through the room. Notice how Shrike responded to the vocalization. Sound draws his attention, but see how he's processing the information now. He's determining whether that sound indicated a threat or simply fear. Shrike stared at the Pillock student for what felt like an eternity. Then his massive head turned away, dismissing her as unimportant. The student's knees buckled and she caught herself on her desk. Breathing hard. Fear is a scent, a sound, a chemical reaction. Drath continued his lecture as if he weren't standing next to something that could kill everyone in the room. Shrike can detect all of these signals. But fear alone does not trigger aggression in a mature apex predator. They have learned to distinguish between prey and beings that are simply afraid. Owen's mind was racing. He'd studied predator behavior for his anthropology research. Big cats, wolves, bears. All of Earth's apex predators shared certain behavioral patterns. They were curious. They tested boundaries, and they almost always investigated something unusual before deciding whether to attack it. Was Shrike the same? Or was Owen about to make a fatal mistake by applying Earth logic to an alien creature? Shrike began moving through the lecture hall, prowling between the rows of desks. Students pressed themselves against walls, trying to make themselves as small and unthreatening as possible. The Chittick student in front of Owen was shaking so hard that his carapace rattled. "Remain calm," Pyrrha called out from her position near the emergency controls. Owen could see her hand hovering near what looked like a containment field activator. Let him investigate. Do not run. Running triggers chase instincts. Shrike approached a Hydrian student, his massive head lowering to examine the water-filled suit. The student inside had gone completely still, their aquatic form barely moving even to breathe. Shrike's nostrils, or whatever those slits on his snout were, flared, taking in information. After a moment, Shrike moved on. He checked each student the same way. A brief investigation, processing information, then moving to the next. Owen realized this was actually a learned behavior. Drath must have socialized Shrike to some degree, teaching him that these classroom situations weren't hunting grounds. That was fascinating, and absolutely terrifying, because it meant Shrike was capable of learning, of adapting, of understanding context, which also meant he was capable of changing his mind. The creature worked his way through the room, getting closer to Owen's row. The student next to Owen, a being whose species name Owen couldn't remember, suddenly stood and bolted for the exit. Fast movement. Shrike's entire body tensed. His head snapped toward the running student, legs coiling as if preparing to spring. "Stop!" Drath's voice cut through the room like a blade. The student froze halfway to the door. Shrike didn't move. He stood utterly still, every muscle taut, eyes locked on the student. Owen could see the predator instinct warring with trained behavior, the calculation happening behind those alien eyes. "Walk slowly to the exit," Drath said quietly. "Do not run again." The student moved in slow, careful steps. Shrike watched every movement but didn't pursue. When the door closed behind the fleeing student, Shrike's posture relaxed slightly. He turned back to his investigation of the remaining class members. Owen's heart was pounding so hard he wondered if Shrike could hear it. Could the creature sense his elevated pulse? Probably. Most predators could detect heartbeats from prey animals, but Owen wasn't prey. He kept reminding himself of that. He was an observer, a student, someone trying to understand, not something trying to escape. Shrike reached Owen's row. The Chittick student in front of him was making that high-pitched whine again, louder now. Shrike's attention fixed on the insectoid being, head tilting slightly as if curious about the sound. Then the massive predator stepped past the Chittick student and moved directly toward Owen. Owen felt his grandfather's voice in his head. "When you see a bear in the woods, you don't run. You don't scream. You make yourself known, you stay calm, and you give it space to make its own decisions." He kept his breathing steady, didn't make eye contact, but didn't look away either. His hands were visible on the desk in front of him, relaxed, non-threatening. He wasn't prey. He wasn't a threat. He was just another being in the room. Shrike came closer. Then closer still. Owen could smell him now. A scent like heated metal and something organic he couldn't identify. The creature's breath moved the hair on Owen's head. "Fascinating," Drath said quietly. Owen could hear surprise in the professor's tone. He's never approached a student this closely before. Shrike's massive head was right in front of Owen now, maybe a foot away. 6 eyes studied him from multiple angles. Owen could see his own reflection in those alien eyes, distorted and small. Every instinct screamed at Owen to move, to run, to do something. But his training held. His experience with Earth's predators held. He remained still, breathing slowly, letting Shrike complete his investigation. One of Shrike's legs moved. The blade claw came to rest on the floor right next to Owen's foot. Not threatening, just positioning. The creature was surrounding him, getting information from multiple angles. Owen heard Pyrrha gasp. Heard Drath take a step forward. Shrike made a sound. Low rumbling, vibrating through the floor and up through Owen's chair. It was unlike anything Owen had ever heard. Part growl, part something else entirely. "That's a threat display," someone whispered. But Owen didn't think so. He'd heard threat sounds from animals. This was different. This was curious, investigative. The sound a creature makes when it's trying to figure something out. Shrike's head moved closer, nostrils flaring as he took in Owen's scent. Processing information, making decisions. Owen stayed perfectly still, his heart hammering but his body calm. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't make it worse by panicking. Shrike completed his circle around Owen's desk. For a moment, Owen thought the creature would move on like he had with the others. Then Shrike did something that made the entire room collectively hold its breath. The massive predator settled his weight against Owen's legs, his armored bulk pressing down like he'd decided this spot, right here next to this human, was where he wanted to be. Professor Drath's surface colors flickered through patterns Owen had never seen before. Shock, maybe, or disbelief. "Nobody move," Drath said slowly. "Shrike has made a choice." The weight was incredible. Owen estimated Shrike had to mass at least 800 pounds, maybe more. The creature hadn't put all his weight on Owen's legs, but enough that Owen could barely feel his feet anymore. His thighs were compressed against the chair and he had to work to keep breathing normally. He didn't dare move. Not even to shift his position. Around the lecture hall, the remaining students stood frozen. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. They all just stared at Owen and the massive predator that had claimed him as some kind of resting spot. Professor Drath moved slowly, each step careful and measured. His surface colors were cycling through patterns too quickly for Owen to interpret. The professor approached from an angle where Shrike could see him clearly, not trying to surprise or threaten. "Shrike," Drath said softly. "What are you doing, old friend?" Shrike's 6 eyes shifted to look at his keeper, but he didn't move from his position. That low rumbling sound came again, vibrating through Owen's legs and up his spine. Up close, Owen could feel the complexity of it. There were layers to the sound, different frequencies woven together. "I have never," Drath said, speaking to the class but not taking his eyes off Shrike. "In 5 years of working with this magnificent being, seen him voluntarily make physical contact with anyone but me. Even with me, it took months of careful interaction before he would allow touch." Pyra's voice came from near the control panel, shaky but trying to maintain composure. "Should we activate the containment field?" "No," Drath said immediately. "That would be interpreted as aggression. Shrike is not threatening the student. He is simply being near him, simply." Someone squeaked. "That's an apex predator from a level 8 Deathworld." Owen wanted to point out that Shrike's weight, while uncomfortable, wasn't actually hurting him. The creature had positioned himself carefully, distributing his mass in a way that pinned Owen without crushing him. That took awareness, control, understanding of his own size and strength. "What should I do?" Owen managed to ask, his voice surprisingly steady despite the situation. Drath's colors shifted to something thoughtful. "That is an excellent question. What do you think you should do?" Owen's mind raced through everything he knew about predator behavior. Shrike had chosen this position. Predators didn't usually settle near something they planned to attack. When big cats on Earth rested against their pride members, it was social behavior. Pack bonding, trust. Was Shrike exhibiting similar behavior? Or was Owen about to die because he was applying Earth logic to an alien creature? "I think," Owen said slowly, "I should let him decide when he wants to move. Forcing the issue might trigger a defensive response." "Very good," Drath said, and his colors warmed with what might have been approval. "You understand instinctive behavior. Where did you learn this?" "Earth has apex predators," Owen said. His left leg was starting to go numb. Not as dangerous as Shrike, but dangerous enough. Growing up near wilderness areas, you learn to read animals, learn when they're being aggressive versus when they're just being animals. Shrike's rumbling changed pitch slightly. Owen felt it shift through different harmonics. The creature's massive head turned, bringing those 6 eyes back to focus on Owen's face. This close, Owen could see details he'd missed before. Scars in the armored plating along Shrike's neck and shoulder. Not random scars. Organized patterns like someone had cut into him deliberately. The scars were old, well-healed, but they told a story. "Professor?" Owen said quietly, not wanting to make any sudden movements even with his voice. "Shrike has scarring on his left side. Pattern scarring." Drath moved closer, though still maintaining careful distance. "You noticed that?" Impressive observation while under stress. "What caused it?" The professor's colors dimmed, sadness rippling across his crystalline surface. "Shrike came to me through a rescue operation. The Kranathi people revere these creatures, but there are always those who see profit in violence. He was taken as a juvenile and forced to fight in illegal combat rings." Owen felt something shift in his chest. Shrike wasn't just an apex predator. He was a survivor of trauma, a being who had experienced cruelty from intelligent species. "How long was he in the fighting rings?" Owen asked. 3 years, as near as we can determine. From age 2 to age 5 in your Earth years. They starved him to make him aggressive, wounded him to make him desperate, pitted him against other creatures for entertainment. The rumbling sound from Shrike changed again. Owen was beginning to understand it wasn't one sound but a complex form of communication. Right now it almost sounded mournful. "The rescue was messy," Drath continued. "Many of the creatures were too damaged, too traumatized to rehabilitate. Shrike was one of the few who could still learn to trust. It took years of careful work." Owen looked at the scars again, then at Shrike's eyes. The intelligence there took on a different meaning. This wasn't just a predator. This was a thinking being who had survived hell and somehow found his way back to something resembling peace. He recognizes something in me, Owen said softly. What do you mean? Owen tried to put it into words. Predators read more than just fear. They read intent, body language, chemical signals. When I stayed calm while everyone else panicked, when I didn't try to run or fight, maybe he recognized that I wasn't seeing him as a monster, just as a creature doing what creatures do. And the rest of your species? Drath asked. Are they also understanding? No, Owen admitted. Humans can be just as cruel as whoever ran those fighting rings. But some of us learned to live alongside dangerous things. We had to. Earth didn't give us the option of being the only predators. Shrike shifted slightly and Owen tensed despite himself. But the creature was just adjusting his position, getting more comfortable. More of his weight settled against Owen's legs. Owen bit back a gasp as sensation fled from his lower body completely. This is unprecedented, Pyrrha called out. Should we be documenting this? Yes, Drath said immediately. Begin recording. Full sensory capture. This may be the most important behavioral observation in xenobiology this decade. 20 minutes passed. Owen's legs went from numb to painful and back to numb again. His back ached from holding position. But he didn't complain, didn't try to move Shrike. The creature's rumbling had settled into a steady rhythm, almost like a purr if purrs could shake the floor. His eyes were half closed now, still aware but relaxed. One of his blade claws rested near Owen's hand, close enough that Owen could see the edge that could probably cut through steel. Students whispered among themselves, their initial terror giving way to fascination. Data pads appeared as they began taking notes. This had transformed from a fear exercise into a genuine learning moment. Finally, Shrike stirred. His massive body lifted, weight coming off Owen's legs all at once. Owen gasped as circulation returned in a painful rush. Pins and needles shot through his feet and thighs. Shrike rose to his full height, stretching each of his 8 legs in sequence. Then he did something that made Owen's throat tight. The creature's massive head lowered, bringing his eyes level with Owen's face. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Shrike made that complex rumbling sound one more time, softer now, almost gentle, and walked back to Professor Drath's side, settling next to his keeper like nothing unusual had happened. The lecture hall erupted in noise, students talking over each other, data pads chirping as notes were saved, Pyrrha's voice trying to restore order. Owen just sat there, legs tingling painfully as feeling returned, and wondered what exactly had just happened. The medical team arrived within minutes of Drath's call. They descended on Owen with scanners and concerned chittering in languages the translator struggled to keep up with. Owen assured them repeatedly that he was fine, just some bruising and temporary numbness. You understand you spent 23 minutes beneath a creature that could have killed you with a single movement? The lead medic, a being that looked like a collection of floating geometric shapes, said through the translator. I'm aware, Owen replied, wincing as feeling continued returning to his legs. But he didn't. That should count for something. The medic made a sound that didn't translate, but the meaning was clear enough. Humans were crazy. By the time the medical team cleared Owen to leave, the story had already spread across the campus network. His datapad wouldn't stop chiming with messages. Most were from students he'd never met, asking questions or expressing disbelief. A few were from news feeds asking for interviews. Owen ignored them all. He just wanted to get back to his quarters and process what had happened. But Professor Drath had other plans. Mr. Hayes, the professor's voice called out as Owen was gathering his things. A moment of your time, if you would. The lecture hall had emptied except for Drath, Pyrrha, and Shrike. The massive predator was back in his reinforced enclosure, but Owen could see those 6 eyes watching him through the transparent sections. Sir? Owen approached cautiously, his leg still unsteady. I would like to understand what happened today, Drath said. His surface colors had settled into steady patterns now, contemplative rather than shocked. In 5 years of working with Shrike and 20 years of studying apex predators from high-risk worlds, I have never witnessed behavior like that. Owen didn't know what to say. He barely understood it himself. Walk with me, Drath said. Bring your datapad. We have much to discuss. They left the lecture hall, Pyrrha staying behind to secure Shrike for the night. Drath led Owen through corridors Owen had never explored, deeper into the xenobiology department. Other students stared as they passed. Word traveled fast. Drath's office was not what Owen expected. Instead of sterile academic space, it looked more like a zoo crossed with a research lab. Enclosures lined the walls, each containing creatures from different worlds. Most were small, nothing like Shrike's size, but Owen recognized several as species listed in the high-risk categories. These are all rescues, Drath explained, noticing Owen's attention. Beings taken from illegal trade, from combat operations, from laboratories that didn't follow ethical guidelines. I rehabilitate them when possible, provide sanctuary when rehabilitation isn't feasible. A creature that looked like a mass of tentacles with too many teeth pressed against its enclosure. Watching Owen with something that might have been curiosity. Owen stepped closer, observing its movement patterns. Don't get too close, Drath warned. Tessa there has a 20-foot strike range and venom that can drop a Morvian in seconds. She's beautiful, Owen said, and meant it. The tentacles moved with liquid grace, and the bioluminescent patterns along her body were hypnotic. Drath's colors warmed. You see them as I do. Not as monsters, but as remarkable beings shaped by their environments. Everything is shaped by its environment, Owen said, humans included. Earth isn't as dangerous as Krinath 7, but it taught us to respect the creatures we shared it with. We had to learn to read predators, understand their behavior, find ways to coexist. Most species don't coexist with their apex predators, Drath said. They either eliminate them or avoid them entirely. Humans did something different. Owen thought about the dogs that had lived with his family, descendants of wolves, the cats that lounged on warm surfaces, miniature tigers that had chosen to live alongside humans thousands of years ago, even the horses humans had partnered with, prey animals that learned to trust a predator species. We made deals, Owen said. With wolves, with horses, with birds of prey. We figured out that some creatures could be partners instead of threats. It took time, took patience, took a lot of failures and some people getting hurt, but eventually we learned. Drath settled into a resting position that looked uncomfortable to Owen's eyes but was probably natural for crystalline beings. Tell me about your world's predators. The ones you grew up with, so Owen did. He talked about the bears that wandered through campsites, looking for food but usually avoiding conflict if given space. The mountain lions that lived in the same forests where humans hiked, rarely seen but always present. The wolves that had been nearly wiped out by humans but were slowly returning, learning to live on the edges of human territory. My grandfather taught me to read them, Owen explained. Bear behavior, deer behavior, even smaller predators like foxes and coyotes. He said if you're going to share space with something that can kill you, you'd better understand it. Wise counsel, Drath said, and today with Shrike you applied that understanding. I tried. I wasn't sure it would work with an alien species. But you stayed calm regardless of that uncertainty. Why? Owen had to think about that. Because panic wouldn't help. If Shrike was going to hurt me, panicking would just make it happen faster. But if there was a chance he was just curious, just trying to understand me the way I was trying to understand him, then staying calm gave us both more options. Drath's colors shifted through several patterns before settling on something Owen couldn't interpret. You have a rare gift, Owen Hayes. The ability to remain analytical even when facing death. To see behavior patterns instead of just threats. I was terrified, Owen admitted. I just didn't let it control me. That is precisely what makes it remarkable. Drath gestured toward his collection of rescued creatures. Do you know what the most common reaction is when researchers encounter these beings? Even trained xenobiologists with years of study? Fear. Aggression disguised as caution. They see danger and respond with containment protocols, with weapons, with dominance displays. They establish hierarchy through force, and these creatures, traumatized and afraid themselves, respond accordingly. Owen looked at Tessa again, her tentacles moving in those graceful patterns. But they don't have to. No, Drath agreed. They don't. What if I told you that Shrike's behavior today was not unique? That you elicit similar responses from other high-risk species? Owen's eyes widened. What? Drath moved to another enclosure, this one containing something Owen hadn't noticed before. It looked like a collection of shadows with too many limbs, huddled in the corner farthest from the viewing panel. This is Ghost, rescued from a military research facility where they were trying to weaponize his species. He has not allowed any being near him in the 8 months since his rescue. He attacks anything that approaches, including his feeding mechanisms. Owen studied the shadow creature. Even from here, he could see the tension in Ghost's form, the way he held himself ready to fight or flee at any moment. Watch, Drath said quietly. The professor adjusted something on the enclosure's control panel. A small panel opened on Owen's side, just large enough for a hand to reach through. I'm not suggesting you put your hand in, Drath said quickly. Just stand near the opening. Let him sense you. Owen approached slowly, stopping about a foot from the opening. He could feel Ghost's attention focus on him, could almost sense the creature's calculating gaze. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Ghost moved. Not attacking, not fleeing, he crept closer to the opening, shadowy form condensing into something more solid. Tentative. Curious. A single appendage, thin as a finger, emerged from the opening. It waved in the air, not touching Owen but clearly sensing him somehow. Impossible, Drath breathed. He's investigating you voluntarily. What does that mean? Owen asked, not moving. It means, Drath said, his colors cycling through amazement, that you may have just revolutionized our understanding of cross-species interaction. And we need to test this further. Ghost's appendage withdrew slowly and the creature retreated back to his corner, but his posture had changed. Less defensive, more curious. Owen looked at Professor Drath, at the office full of rescued creatures, at the data pads covered in research notes. What are you proposing? He asked. I'm proposing, Drath said, that you become my research assistant, that we document this phenomenon, understand it and learn from it, that we discover whether humans possess something the rest of the galaxy has missed. Owen thought about the weight of Shrike against his legs, the trust implicit in that contact. He thought about Ghost's tentative investigation, the first step toward healing from trauma. He thought about all the creatures back on Earth that had learned to trust humans, and all the humans who had learned to deserve that trust. When do we start? Owen asked. 3 weeks passed in a blur of research sessions, careful observations, and detailed documentation. Owen's schedule transformed from standard student coursework to something more focused and intense. Every day he spent hours in Drath's lab, working with the rescued creatures, learning their behaviors, and discovering that his first encounter with Shrike hadn't been a fluke. The shadow creature, Ghost, now approached the observation panel whenever Owen entered the lab. Not close enough to touch, but closer than he'd allowed anyone since his rescue. The tentacled being, Tessa, had stopped striking at the walls when Owen was nearby. Even the smaller creatures showed changes, subtle but measurable, and Shrike, the massive predator, had become something like a friend, if friendship was possible between species so different. Owen spent an hour each day in Shrike's enclosure, supervised by Drath but otherwise alone with the creature. They sat together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Owen talking about Earth or his studies. Shrike would rumble those complex sounds, and Owen was starting to understand the nuances. Different frequencies meant different things. Low and steady meant contentment. Higher pitches signaled curiosity. Sharp bursts indicated alert attention. You're learning his language, Drath observed one afternoon, watching through the safety glass as Shrike rested his massive head near Owen's shoulder. I'm trying, Owen said. It's not like any Earth language, but there are patterns, meanings. Most xenobiologists spend years trying to decode predator communication. You're doing it in weeks. Owen ran his hand along Shrike's armored plating, feeling the warm surface beneath his palm. The scars from the fighting rings were rough under his fingers. Maybe it's because I'm not trying to decode it like a language. I'm just listening to what he's telling me. Shrike's rumble shifted to that pleased frequency, and one massive eye rotated to look at Owen. In that gaze, Owen saw understanding, recognition, trust that had been broken by cruelty and was slowly being rebuilt through patience. The research attracted attention beyond the xenobiology department. Professor Drath had presented preliminary findings to the university's science council, and word had spread from there. Other researchers wanted to observe Owen's sessions. Students from across campus found excuses to visit the lab. The attention made Owen uncomfortable, but Drath managed it carefully, limiting access to protect both Owen and the creatures. They don't understand what we're documenting here, Drath explained during one of their evening debriefing sessions. They see novelty and interesting phenomenon, but this is more fundamental than that. Owen looked up from his notes. He'd been documenting the day's observations with Shrike, trying to put into words how the creature had shown him a new play behavior, something Drath had never witnessed before. What do you mean? Drath's colors shifted to something professorial, the pattern he used when explaining complex concepts. The galactic community has classified worlds based on environmental danger. Death worlds, safe worlds, everything in between. We've created elaborate safety protocols, containment procedures, entire fields of study devoted to managing dangerous fauna from arm's length. That makes sense, Owen said. If something can kill you, you want to be careful. Careful, yes. But we've gone beyond careful into complete separation. We study these beings as threats to be contained, problems to be solved. We've forgotten that they are thinking creatures with emotional needs, social structures, capacity for connection. Owen thought about the fighting rings that had scarred Shrike, the military facility that had tortured Ghost. Some people haven't forgotten. They just don't care. True. But even those of us who care, who dedicate our lives to these creatures, we maintain distance. We interact through barriers, through intermediaries, through control mechanisms. You're the first being I've ever observed who simply sits with an apex predator, as though sharing space is the most natural thing in the universe. It is natural, Owen said. At least it was on Earth. Humans sat with wolves around fires thousands of years ago. We built relationships with creatures that could kill us because isolation wasn't an option. We had to share the planet. And in doing so, you learned something the rest of us missed. A notification chimed on Drath's console. He checked it, and his colors flickered with interest. The university has approved expanded research parameters. We can bring in test subjects from other departments, document responses across species, build a comprehensive dataset. Owen felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. That's good, right? It's essential. If we're going to change how the galaxy approaches high-risk fauna, we need evidence that can't be dismissed as anomaly. We need to show this is replicable, teachable, fundamental. Over the next week, other students began participating in controlled observations. They watched Owen's sessions with Shrike, took notes, asked questions. Some were skeptical. Others were fascinated. All of them were careful to follow Drath's protocols. One student, a pillock named Cree who had fled the original demonstration, approached Owen after a session. "I want to understand," Cree said, her feathered crest rippling with nervous energy, "how you can sit with that creature and not be afraid." "I am afraid," Owen admitted. "Every time. Shrike is dangerous. Pretending otherwise would be stupid." "Then how?" Owen struggled to put it into words. "Fear doesn't have to control you. It can inform you. When I'm with Shrike, I'm aware of every movement he makes, every sound, every shift in posture. That awareness comes from fear. But I don't let fear make my decisions." "What makes your decisions?" "Observation, understanding, respect." Owen gestured toward the enclosure where Shrike was resting. "He's not a monster. He's a person, just not a human person. He has preferences, moods, boundaries. If I respect those, if I pay attention to what he's communicating, we can share space safely." Cree's feathers settled slightly. "Could I learn this?" "I think so. Want to try?" They started small. Cree observed from outside the enclosure while Owen worked with Shrike. Then over several days, Cree moved closer to the safety glass. Then closer still. Drath monitored everything, ready to intervene if necessary. The breakthrough came during a session where Owen was checking Shrike's claws for damage. The creature tolerated this maintenance, understanding it helped him stay comfortable. Cree stood at the enclosure door, watching through the transparent sections. Shrike's attention shifted to the pillock student. His 6 eyes focused, that calculating gaze that made prey species freeze in terror. But Cree didn't run. She stayed still, just as Owen had taught her. Breathing steady, non-threatening posture. Aware but not panicked, Shrike studied her for a long moment. Then he made a sound Owen had learned meant dismissal. Not threat, not interest. Just acknowledgement. "You're there, I see you. You're not important right now." Cree's feathers fluffed with something that might have been pride. "I did it," she whispered. I stayed calm. "You did," Owen agreed. "That's the first step." More students joined the observation program. Not all of them succeeded. Some couldn't overcome their fear responses. Others tried to approach the work with dominance tactics that set the creatures on edge. But a few, like Cree, began to understand. During one evening session, Drath brought in a creature Owen hadn't met before. The being was in a heavily reinforced transport container, warning labels covering every surface. "This is Razor," Drath explained. "From a world rated level 9, the highest risk classification. His species has never been successfully studied outside containment because they attack anything in proximity. Owen approached the container cautiously. Through the small viewing port, he could see something massive and angular, covered in blade-like protrusions that looked sharp enough to cut light itself. He was confiscated from a collector who kept him sedated constantly. The trauma is severe. He's been awake for 6 weeks and has injured 3 handlers despite all protocols. Why bring him here? Owen asked. Because if your approach works with Razor, it works with anything. This is our test case, Owen. The creature that nobody can reach. Owen looked at the warning labels, the reinforced container, the scars on Razor's visible plating. Another being broken by cruelty, trapped in fear and rage. We'll need time, Owen said. And patience. Lots of patience. We have both, Drath replied. Let's begin. They started that night, with Owen simply sitting near Razor's container, not trying to interact, not even looking directly at the creature, just being present, sharing space. Razor raged inside his container, throwing himself against the walls, making sounds that registered as pure aggression on every scanner. Owen sat quietly, breathing steadily, and waited. By the end of the hour, Razor's attacks had lessened. The creature was still agitated, still aggressive, but the violent peaks were lower. Measurably lower. Remarkable, Drath said, checking the readouts. His stress indicators dropped 15% just from your presence. He's starting to understand I'm not a threat, Owen said. It'll take time, but we'll get there. As Owen left the lab that night, Shrike's rumbling followed him down the corridor. A goodbye, maybe, or encouragement. Either way, it felt like approval from a friend who understood what Owen was trying to do. Teach the galaxy that monsters weren't born. They were made, and with patience they could be healed. The lecture hall was packed, not just with xenobiology students, but with faculty from multiple departments, researchers from other institutes, even a few observers from galactic conservation organizations. Word about Professor Drath's research had spread far beyond the university campus. Owen stood at the side of the teaching platform, trying not to fidget. Public speaking had never been his strength. He preferred quiet observation, patient work with creatures who didn't judge or analyze his every word. But this was important. What they'd discovered over the past 6 weeks needed to be shared. Professor Drath called the room to attention, his crystalline surface reflecting the overhead lights in patterns of confidence and pride. Thank you all for attending. Today we present findings that may fundamentally alter our approach to high-risk fauna rehabilitation and study. The professor pulled up holographic displays showing data from dozens of sessions. Stress indicators, behavioral patterns, aggression metrics, all showing measurable improvements in creatures that had been deemed impossible to reach. Traditional approaches to dangerous fauna rely on containment and distance, Drath continued. We maintain barriers, use sedation, employ dominance techniques to establish control. These methods work to a degree, but they also reinforce trauma in already damaged beings. He gestured toward Owen. My research assistant, Owen Hayes, has demonstrated an alternative approach. One based not on control but on understanding. Not on dominance but on respect. The results speak for themselves. The holographic display shifted to show footage from Owen's sessions. Shrike resting peacefully beside him. Ghost extending tentative contact. Tessa moving gracefully rather than striking in fear. And most impressively, Razor, the level 9 predator that no one had been able to approach, now tolerating Owen's presence without constant aggression. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some skeptical, some impressed, all interested. We believe, Drath said, that Mr. Hayes represents something unique in galactic xenobiology. A bridge species. Humans come from what we classify as a moderate-risk deathworld. Earth produced numerous apex predators, and humanity evolved alongside them rather than eliminating them. This created a species with innate understanding of predator psychology. A Chittick researcher in the front row raised an appendage. Are you suggesting humans are naturally better at this than other species? Not better, Owen spoke up, his voice carrying across the room despite his nervousness. Just different. Most spacefaring species evolved on worlds where they became the dominant predator, or where large predators were rare. Humans had to learn to share space with things that could kill us. We developed skills for reading behavior, understanding intent, finding peaceful coexistence. But surely trained xenobiologists can learn these skills, another voice called out. They can, Drath agreed. We've already seen evidence of this. Several students have successfully applied Mr. Hayes's techniques with measurable results. He pulled up data from Kree's sessions. The Pillock student had progressed from terrified observer to someone who could now enter Shrike's enclosure under supervision. Her stress indicators were still elevated, but her ability to manage fear had improved dramatically. The key insight, Drath continued, is that fear itself isn't the problem. Fear is natural and appropriate when facing dangerous beings. The problem is letting fear dictate all interactions. Mr. Hayes has taught us that calm observation, patient presence, and respectful boundaries create space for connection that containment protocols cannot achieve. An older researcher, whose species Owen didn't recognize, stood. This is all very interesting, but what practical applications does it have? Are you suggesting we dismantle safety protocols? Absolutely not, Drath said firmly. Safety remains paramount, but we can implement these techniques within existing safety frameworks, reduce sedation for traumatized creatures, longer habituation periods with patient handlers, training programs for researchers that emphasize understanding over control. Show us, the old researcher challenged. Not footage. Show us a live demonstration. Drath's colors flickered with something that might have been satisfaction. He'd been expecting this. Very well. Mr. Hayes, are you prepared? Owen's heart hammered, but he nodded. They'd planned for this possibility. The side door opened and two handlers guided Shrike into the lecture hall. The massive predator moved with that liquid grace that still made Owen's breath catch. 800 pounds of apex predator, claws that could shred steel, 6 eyes that saw everything. The audience reacted predictably. Gasps, movement away from the aisles, hands reaching for emergency call buttons. Please remain calm, Drath said. Shrike has been in this lecture hall many times. He is accustomed to crowds, but I ask that you maintain quiet and avoid sudden movements. Shrike prowled to the front of the platform, his attention sweeping across the audience. Owen could read the creature's body language now. Alert but not aggressive. Curious about the crowd but not threatened by it. Comfortable in this space that had become familiar. Owen stepped forward, moving into Shrike's line of sight. Hey, friend. The creature's 6 eyes focused on him, and that complex rumbling sound vibrated through the floor. Recognition. Greeting. Pleasure at seeing someone familiar. Owen sat on the floor of the platform, cross-legged, hands visible and relaxed. An invitation, not a demand, Shrike approached. The audience held its collective breath. The massive predator circled Owen once, twice, checking his surroundings as he always did. Then he settled beside Owen, not quite putting weight on him this time, but close enough that their bodies touched, head resting near Owen's shoulder, rumbling that contentment frequency. Owen reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, and rested his hand on Shrike's armored plating. The creature leaned into the touch. This is trust, Owen said to the audience, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Not control. Not dominance. Trust that took weeks to build and requires constant maintenance. Shrike knows I won't hurt him. I know he won't hurt me. We respect each other's boundaries and communicate clearly. He demonstrated by making a small gesture, a hand signal they'd developed. Shrike responded by lifting his head, exposing his throat. A vulnerable position that no predator would take around a threat. Every species has their own communication methods, Owen continued. Their own ways of expressing comfort or distress. Learning to read those signals, respecting what they tell you, that's the foundation of everything we've accomplished. A younger researcher stood. But what about truly aggressive specimens? Ones that attack regardless of approach? That's where patience becomes critical, Owen said. Shrike shifted against him and Owen adjusted his position smoothly. Razor, the level 9 predator Professor Drath mentioned, still can't be safely approached. But his aggression has decreased 40% over 6 weeks. He's learning that not every interaction ends in pain. Eventually, he'll understand that some beings can be trusted. How long will that take? The researcher asked. However long it takes, Owen replied simply. You can't rush healing. You can't force trust. You can only be consistent, patient, and respectful. Some creatures will never fully recover from their trauma. That's reality. But they deserve the chance to try. Drath stepped forward. We're proposing a new training program for xenobiology students. One that emphasizes these techniques alongside traditional containment protocols. Additionally, we're seeking funding for a rehabilitation center where traumatized high-risk fauna can receive long-term care using these methods. The old researcher who had challenged them earlier stood again. I've studied dangerous fauna for 50 years. I've seen countless approaches fail, but I've never seen anything like this. He gestured toward Owen and Shrike. What you're suggesting could save species we've written off as too dangerous to preserve. It could change conservation efforts across the galaxy. That's our hope, Drath said, his colors warming with emotion. With proper implementation, proper training, proper funding, we believe we can revolutionize our relationship with the galaxy's most misunderstood beings. The presentation continued for another hour. Questions, data analysis, debate about implementation. Through it all, Shrike remained beside Owen, occasionally rumbling commentary that made Owen smile. When the audience finally dispersed, leaving only Drath, Owen, and a few close colleagues, Owen felt the exhaustion hit. The constant awareness required to work with Shrike took more energy than people realized. Shrike must have sensed it, because he shifted his position, moving his bulk to provide support for Owen's back. A gesture of care that made Owen's throat tight. You did well today, Drath said softly. Both of you. We couldn't have done it without your research, your willingness to try something different. Owen replied. I spent years studying these creatures from behind barriers, Drath admitted. Convinced that distance was necessary for safety. You showed me that connection and safety aren't mutually exclusive. You taught me to be a better researcher, a better teacher. Cree approached hesitantly, her feathers rippling with nervous energy. Professor? Mr. Hayes, I've been thinking about your rehabilitation center proposal. I'd like to be part of it, to learn more, to help if I can. Owen smiled. We'll need all the help we can get, especially people who understand how hard it is to face fear and work through it. Other students joined them, asking questions, offering assistance, sharing ideas. The conversation stretched late into the evening, plans forming for something that could genuinely change the galaxy's approach to its most dangerous inhabitants. Finally, as the last students left and the lecture hall emptied, Owen stood. His legs protested, still remembering the weight of Shrike's first contact weeks ago. Shrike rose with him, stretching each leg in sequence. Then the creature did something he'd only done a handful of times. He lowered his massive head and gently pressed it against Owen's chest. A gesture of affection that crossed all species barriers. Owen wrapped his arms around Shrike's head, feeling the warmth of the creature's armored plating, the steady rhythm of his breathing. A monster, the galaxy had called him. A weapon those fighting rings had tried to make him. But Owen knew better. Shrike was a person, a friend, a survivor who had found his way back to trust, despite every reason not to. Time to get you back to your enclosure, Owen said softly. Big day tomorrow. Razor's going to let me sit next to his container without going into a rage spiral. I can feel it. Shrike rumbled, the sound carrying layers of meaning Owen was still learning to interpret. But the core message was clear enough. I believe in you. They walked together through the darkened corridors, predator and human, sharing space as naturally as if they'd evolved side by side. Behind them, Professor Drath followed, already composing messages to conservation organizations across the galaxy. The universe was vast, full of creatures it had deemed too dangerous to save. But maybe, just maybe, humanity had brought something to the stars that could change that. Not advanced weapons or superior technology, just patience, understanding, and the simple belief that monsters were made, not born, and what was made could be unmade. One careful interaction at a time. Shrike's rumbling echoed through the halls as they walked, and Owen smiled. The galaxy was listening. Now they just had to teach it to hear.